Xi Jinping's a different cat. In some ways, a greater threat to the world. He is engaged in what, from his perspective, is a war that is preparing for an even greater conflict.
Former U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo has expressed concern that the CCP presents a significant threat to the world, surpassing even the Nazis in some respects. This is a strong political statement that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. While the Western world recognizes the Nazis as having committed every conceivable crime, including war crimes and crimes against humanity, the assertion that the CCP is worse than them suggests that the CCP is not merely a competitor or guilty of isolated misdeeds, but that everything it does is a challenge to the US. The CCP is seen as an adversary of the US. At the same time, it is noticeable that Xi Jinping has taken the spotlight and unusually has publicly criticized the US, blaming them for some of China's recent challenges. Analysts indicate that Xi's open criticism of the US clarifies his stance, and according to his thinking, major actions are definitely forthcoming. Even a move to cripple the US is possible, not to mention attacking Taiwan. The Wall Street Journal has also reported that Xi Jinping's ultimate goal is to prepare China for conflict between the two countries. At present, we can observe a division between two groups. One is formed by the CCP and Russia, while the other is composed of the US and the Western countries. Both sides seem unwilling to yield. No matter which group ends up losing, they will be silenced for centuries to come. The United States has long been aware of the threat posed by the CCP. In an interview with PBS, Representative Gallagher, chairman of the House Select Committee on CCP, discusses this issue.
What do you understand the goal of the CCP to be?
To be the dominant global power and to render us subordinate, humiliated, and increasingly irrelevant on the world stage. The Select Committee on the CCP is to make the case to the American people as to why this is something they need to be concerned about and what we can do together to counter it.
On March 3rd, several committees in the House of Representatives approved 11 bills targeting the CCP. The Foreign Affairs Committee introduced 8 bills in support of Taiwan and against China, while the Financial Committee passed 3 bills in support of Taiwan. These bills will soon be presented to the House for a vote. One of the bills requires that if the PLA attacks Taiwan, assets of Chinese officials abroad will be disclosed and may be confiscated. Based on the analysis above, it is evident that although China is not legally considered an adversary of the US, it is increasingly viewed as one in the public eye. Eliminating the CCP has become a widely accepted political position in the US, and individuals who previously aligned themselves with the CCP are now actively disassociating. The CCP has failed to win the support of the American people. While it will take time to build public support and restore military production capacity in the event of war, and American companies will need to leave China, it is becoming increasingly clear that conflict between the two nations is inevitable. The US and China have been at odds with each other, but where will the confrontation begin? Taiwan is often cited as a potential flashpoint. Now let us examine the views of the US military and intelligence community on this matter. Here is what CIA Director Burns had to say on CBS's program Face the Nation last month.
It's conceivable, but I think there's no foreign leader who's watched more carefully Vladimir Putin's experience in Ukraine, the evolution of the war, than Xi Jinping has. And I think in many ways he's been unsettled and sobered by what he's seen. I think he was surprised by the very poor military performance of the Russians. I think surprised also by the degree of Western solidarity in support of Ukraine. In other words, the willingness of not just the United States, but our European allies as well, to absorb a certain amount of economic cost in the interest of inflicting greater economic damage on Russia over time. So all of that, I think, has sobered Xi Jinping to some extent.
Also last month, the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, hosted a seminar on the Indo-Pacific situation, which featured guest speakers such as Pacific Army Commander General Charles Flynn and the US's first female Secretary of the Army, Christine Wormuth. General Flynn laid out very effectively the complexity of an amphibious invasion of an island like Taiwan, and Miss Christine Wormuth told the audience,
I would imagine, while China has, greatly modernized its military over the last 20 years, that is not a military operation for the faint of heart. So I would imagine, President Xi may have questions about how successfully the PLA could do that. I personally am not of the view that, an amphibious invasion of Taiwan is imminent.
To put it simply, while the PLA may have improved their military capacities, they still lack the ability to cross the Taiwan Strait within the next 1 to 2 years. It is unlikely that they would recklessly attempt to do so. Observers suggest that Xi Jinping may not be fully prepared for an amphibious landing, but he has 2 viable options to put China in a wartime state. One option is to choose a location between Jinmen, Matsu and Dongsha to fight a partial battle, which is expected to occur between June and September this year, dragging China into a state of war while also having a stabilizing effect. Another option is to use weapons of mass destruction to threaten the West. This possibility was not ruled out by several US intelligence agencies, which was disclosed in the annual threat assessment of the US intelligence community. According to the report, CCP will continue efforts to achieve President Xi Jinping's vision of making China the preeminent power in East Asia and a major power on the world stage. As Xi begins his 3rd term as China's leader, the CCP will work to press Taiwan on unification, undercut US influence, drive wedges between Washington and its partners, and foster some norms that favor its authoritarian system. Observers suggest that undercut US influence is merely diplomatic language. To put it plainly, the CCP is preparing to directly confront and defeat the US with its military capabilities. However, they cannot reveal how terrifying this prospect is to the public. The report indicates that China is building hundreds of new ICBM silos, continues to bolster its domestic defense production capabilities for WMD and advanced conventional weapons, and has counter-space weapons capabilities intended to target US and allied satellites. Its ultimate goal is to create a military force that can confront the US in a large-scale, sustained conflict. During the pandemic lockdown, there have been reports that the CCP has been ramping up its production of missiles. Mainland Chinese media has reported power outages in multiple cities in Hunan, Jiangxi and Zhejiang in December 2020 that had not been seen in years. The scope of power cuts expanded further in September 2021. According to Chinese self-media, the reason behind the power outages is the military industry's increased need for electricity. It is true that the production of military goods requires a large amount of electricity. For example, the production process of refining metals and enriching uranium requires a lot of electricity. Enriching uranium in particular requires a particularly large amount of electricity. Since then, China's domestic production capacity has increasingly shifted towards the military industry. Many facilities are working overtime to produce missiles and nuclear weapons, and the production scale is currently being further expanded. According to Xi Jinping, the Communist Army may not have as precise weapons as the US military, but they outnumber the US by 10 or even 100 times. If, in the end, the US ran out of missiles, but the CCP would have still had more to fire. Xi Jinping compared the situation to the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany, where the Soviet Union had 3 million troops in the Battle of Berlin, later adding another 2 million to outnumber the Germans. The German machine gunners were exhausted from fighting against such a large force. Nevertheless, the CCP is currently utilizing not only human resources, but also missiles and atomic bombs. With an abundance of missiles, they are capable of transporting not only explosives, but also a variety of prohibited weapons, including virus weapons, biochemical weapons, and dirty bombs. As a result, the CCP has the capabilities to launch these weapons to numerous locations around the world, including Asia and Europe. It's important to consider that the CCP may use weapons of mass destruction as a bargaining tool. In the event that China were to divide into multiple countries, these weapons could potentially spread beyond China's borders and pose a threat to the rest of the world. it's one way for the CCP to exert pressure on the US. The problem of the CCP causing trouble in Taiwan's outlying islands can be resolved relatively easily. However, the challenging part is that if Xi Jinping acts recklessly, there is a possibility that he may take drastic measures, including the potential use of nuclear weapons, before the US can intervene. According to a recent report by the New York Times, the US Marine Corps has stepped up its training simulations for combat operations in environments similar to that of the People's Republic of China, PRC. This includes training for reconnaissance in China's heartland, combat operations on islands, deserts, tropical rainforests, and frigid zones, as well as how to coordinate operations without modern communication. Various US military training bases have been created to mimic different environments found in China. Barstow, California is used to simulate the Gobi Desert, while Camp Pendleton's terrain is similar to that of northeastern China. 29 Palms is designed to replicate the environment found in Fujian and Guangdong, and San Clemente Island is used to simulate island environments. Experts suggest that the US infrequently employs domestic operations in conflicts with major powers. The fact that the Marine Corps is currently undergoing such training indicates that the US is attempting to decrease the chances of large-scale warfare by relying on quick elite operations, including decapitation-style tactics. While the US has largely discarded the concept of decapitating Chinese leaders, it does not completely exclude the possibility of using such strategies to eliminate particular generals or staff centers. What's most interesting is that the US Marine Corps is now teaching how to catch and slaughter rabbits and other animals for consumption. With the highest number of rabbits located in Inner Mongolia, Gansu, Shanxi, North China, and Northeast China, it's reasonable to speculate that the US could enter Inner Mongolia's Alza League from its base in Mongolia, and then move on to Gansu and Xinjiang. According to sources, Marines will mark key nuclear facilities and disable them before the CCP can launch any large-scale war or military action. It's been suggested that the New York Times deliberately leaked this information, possibly to alert the CCP that the US Marine Corps may be deploying.